The following presentation is controversial and may be offensive to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Radio from the heart of America now.
And now, the Commander-in-Chief is back. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, and we are back, and we are grateful that you're here with us. We're at the bottom of the first hour, Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups. And my guest coming up in just a moment is Mike Shoesmith, the executive editor of PNN News and Ministry Network. Before I bring him on, though, I was just sharing this with Mike a moment ago. I want to share it with our audience because it just shows the reach of Freedom Friday, number one, but most importantly, the information contained within this email. So coming in at freedomfriday@netzero.com, and by the way, that's one way you can communicate with us live during the show, freedomfriday@netzero.com. But this came in at the end of the show last week, so I have to share it this week. But it says, "Hey Carl, just listen to your show, and especially the segment about the Brexit situation in England. Remember that just happened last week. And so listen to this. This person is writing to us from England, so they were listening live or listening to the show from England. And we, as I said, we have listeners all over the world and from coast to coast in the United States. It's amazing. Every time we open up the phone lines, the calls come in from everywhere, including, of course, the Gulf Coast area where we have a huge audience because that's where this program started. But anyway, it says, just listen to your show about the Brexit situation in England. We who voted for Brexit need a lot of prayer. There are tremendous dark forces in the European Union, and as a result, many people are irrationally resisting any change from the status quo. Resistance to change isn't unusual in itself, but there is aggression beyond the natural disappointment that this type of situation can bring. So the blinders are on, which is Satan's work, of course. So we pray to lift the scales from their eyes, and that's in quotes. And then it says, despite clearly demonstrating that UK sovereignty had been stolen, and that we are headed forward toward a state domination from the European Union on biblical dictatorial scale, people still want to remain in the European Union. And this writer says that's very scary to watch for those of us in Great Britain. He says the battle may have been won, but the war isn't over yet. Please pray for us. And that comes from one of our listeners in England and one of our listeners to Freedom Friday. That's quite amazing, isn't it, Mike Shoesmith?
Yeah, no, the people in England, England, the land there, the topography still bears many of the scars. When the Bolsheviks tried their best to, they pretended to help us out. The Russians under Stalin, they pretended to help us out. And the Bolsheviks, they were the people who led the revolution into Russia to overthrow the Tsars under Lenin. Mm-hmm. And then Stalin was a successor, and then Stalin was in charge of the Russian military during World War II. So if it wasn't for American involvement, the Bolshevik communists in Russia would have run roughshod over everybody there. And forget about speaking German. How about speaking Russian? I mean, the Americans put a stop to that, not only to the Nazis but to the Russians, so Great Britain still bears the scars on the land there from that war. So they're very familiar with what's going on here, and I think perhaps that may be one of the reasons why there was such an outcry against this globalist movement to take over their country.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And as the person that was listening to the show, you'll have to forgive me. Listen, I'm right here with you, Mike. I'm listening to everything. I got it. In fact, I have a salient comment to make. The deal is, the computer just crashed again right in front of me.
Oh,
this happens almost every Friday, and only on Fridays, and only on Freedom Friday.
I know the feeling.
I mean, and all of the times that our computers have been infected with viruses and seized and the phone lines have been messed up, it always happens on Fridays. I mean, even the owner of the station told me that. He said, Carl, it only happens during your show. And it's been going on for a year or two, off and on. Not every Friday, but often. So anyway, to the NSA or to the OBOTs or whoever has control of the computer right now,
Oh my gosh.
See, there's a conspiracy theory, but
There you go.
but you know,
Just a theory, though.
just a
theory.
theory. We haven't proven it yet, but I just got the blue screen of death. This happened a couple of weeks ago, same thing, and several times. But anyway, yes, no, the person who wrote us, I mean, that was the premise of their email, is they were just so distraught over the fact that, look, what the EU is doing, it's in the process of destroying Great Britain, its borders, its nationalistic pride, its nationalistic fervor, its history, its heritage, and there is still this huge population within Great Britain that wants to stay in the EU and continue the open borders and the destruction of its culture. But I guarantee you it's the same thing that's happening in the United States. We're just not quite to the same point Great Britain is at yet, but we're getting there. And that's this influx of immigrants and refugees. It's being done on purpose to change the flavor of our culture. Exactly.
You know, and they got to get the guns. You know, they got the guns from the British. They got the guns from the Canadians. Now there's a big move, a big push to get to the guns in America, you know, because, you know, we can't have Americans with the ability to defend themselves against the Bolshevik communists. I mean, let's face it. We are looking at a born-again version of the Bolshevik communist movement trying to take over America, and that is why we see the influx of this Islamic invasion being they have the red carpet rolled out to them by the administrations in the European countries and the United States of America and Canada, because Islam weakens nations. And it becomes low-hanging fruit to go in and take them over when people live in fear that they're going to get their heads chopped off in their front yard, pardon my French.
Well, listen, and let me just interject. You said Islam weakens nations, and some people might have been riding down the road listening to that, cringing, saying, well, I don't know if that's politically correct to say that or not, but it's truth. Somebody, please name me an Islamic nation, a nation that is primarily Islamic, that is an economic engine, that is a military powerhouse, that is a bastion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is a nation that the whole rest of the world wants to live in or do business with or be a part of. Please name that Islamic nation. Please, I'll wait.
Right. And let's not forget the words of Eric Holder himself, who several years ago stood up in front of a room full of people. Perhaps, I'm not sure if he was aware that there was a camera pointed at him, but we have the video where he said, we need to brainwash Americans to
give up their guns.
To give up their guns,
yep.
Right? This is Eric Holder?
Yeah, no, we've got that video. He actually said that, and he was before a large group of people. It's on video. It's on the internet. We've got copies of it. We put it in its context. It's all over PNN, or you can get it at the PNN website, where Eric Holder literally makes a speech saying, you know, we've got to, he says, even if we have to brainwash people in order to get this Second Amendment changed.
And then he says, using Hollywood and using media. Well, what do we see happening now? We see the media and Hollywood using belittling language towards people whom they refer to as, quote, conspiracy theorists. And yet this week alone, Carl, we have the release of the Benghazi report, which confirms two conspiracy theories, which are now confirmed fact, at the highest levels of American government. We have two confirmed conspiracy theories in that report. What are they? They are, first of all, that the Clinton and others in the White House conspired to withhold military help, which was requested by the Ambassador Stevens in Libya multiple times. And these poor guys, you can just imagine, right? These guys standing on a roof trying to defend themselves from the Islamic hordes with no help coming. It was reported in the Benghazi report that nothing, no assets, no matter how many times they requested it, no assets were sent rolling that way. Nothing.
Right.
Nothing. They were left hanging to defend themselves, and they were, in my opinion, they were killed by Hillary Clinton's State Department. That is my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, and now that some of those emails have been released, wherein in the night that it's happening, she's having conversations with people, admitting that that there's no video involved, that it's a terrorist.
Right, that's conspiracy theory number 2 that's been confirmed in the Benghazi report, was the conspiracy. People at the highest levels of U.S. government conspired to fool the American people into thinking that it was a video made by a pastor in Florida and other people put on YouTube, which denigrated Islam, that video was responsible for the death of American soldiers and an American ambassador in Benghazi, Libya. That was a conspiracy to fool the American people. They knew it wasn't true.
Right.
But they conspired to fool. Listen, folks, history is littered, scattered with conspiracies that are not theory. They are fact.
Right.
And we have case after case. MK Ultra, the founding of the country, was the biggest conspiracy to hit the world in the last 300 years, was the founding of the United States of America to overthrow the King of England.
Yep.
It was a conspiracy. There are conspiracy after conspiracy after conspiracy is factual. We don't have to theorize anymore. Right. And listen, we'll get to more of this after the break, but my gosh, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, what kind of journalist are you? You're just some guy or girl sitting behind a counter reading a teleprompter written by disinformation agents. Hello, Bill O'Reilly.
Right.
And I mean, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, what kind of cop are you? Most crimes are conspiracies. People conspire to, two guys conspire to rob your car at 2:00 in the morning so they get some money for meth. If I sound fed up, hopefully I sound passionately fed up, because quite honestly, I'm fed up with all the allegations that conspiracy theorists are crazy. If you're not a conspiracy theorist, you are a mental midget, in my opinion.
Absolutely, which is why I've said so many times, I don't mind if people call me a conspiracy theorist, because that's exactly, that's how I was trained in law enforcement, and now that I've been in media for so many years, that's exactly how I think. I start off by asking the tough questions, weeding through the information. If we find something that, that squares up to the narrative, then we say it. But if it doesn't square, then we start investigating, we start examining. But you see, the Bolsheviks, the Obama bots, the leftists, the bedwetters, the snowflakes. I mean, you can go right on down, with the pejoratives and the adjectives. But these people, what they do when you start getting close to them in any way, when you start uncovering their dastardly deeds, the first thing they do is they try to marginalize you. And in today's world, most people hate to be called names. I personally don't care. I've been called so many names for 40 years of my life as a cop and as a pastor. I don't care anymore. I can look at myself in the mirror. I know what I've said, and I know what I haven't said. And so that's what makes us so effective, Mike. That's what makes PNN and Freedom Friday so effective. We don't care. These guys try to marginalize us. It just fires us up even more.
Well, and then you have two of the greatest conspiracy theorists who, in the last 100 years, were able to overthrow a president simply by believing a man who called them with a raspy voice and said, there is trouble in the White House. Yeah. And we know them as Woodward and Bernstein, and then the president was President Nixon. Yeah. And these Woodward and Bernstein, they were real journalists who were conspiracy theorists, and as a result, they proved it as a fact, and a corrupt president was thrown out of office.
Yeah, and they had a conspiracy theory. Imagine that. Hey, we've got to take a time out. Yeah, Mike, listen, when we take this time out, we'll come back and talk more about conspiracy theorists and how that relates to Freedom Friday and PNN. And folks, you are in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio, and aren't you glad that you are? Because so far, everything you've heard, you will not hear, even in the mainstream media tonight, even in the conservative mainstream media, but you're going to hear it here. And sometimes you hear it here for the very first time. You're listening, Freedom Friday. Carl Gallups. We'll be right back.
8:30. How can one man bother so many people by simply telling the truth? Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, welcome back, America, from sea to shining sea and coast to coast. You are in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio. Mike Shoesmith, the executive editor of PNN News and Ministry Magazine. Welcome back, Mike Shoesmith. And so we were just talking about conspiracy theories, and and the leftists, they like to tag that on you. If you're getting too close to something, if there's something they don't like, if they want to try to marginalize you, boom, they're going to call you a hoaxer or a conspiracy theorist, right?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand that there's a vast difference between being a conspiracy theorist, which most police officers are, and any good journalist is a conspiracy theorist. There's a vast difference between being a conspiracy theorist and being a hoaxer. Hoaxers hoaxers, they see a demon behind every doorknob.
Right.
They don't believe anything ever.
Right.
And so you were accused of being a hoaxer in many news outlets when you interviewed Barry on the whole Sandy Hook thing. Oh, he's a Sandy Hook hoaxer, and so on and so forth. And I don't know, what is your give us the bottom line on all of that.
Yeah, no thanks. And listen, let me go on record again, because the bottom line is the liberal media rags falsely accuse me, and they have nothing on record to prove their accusations. Nothing. Right. Now, they've got some out of context stuff, but I've challenged people. Produce anything I've put in writing to say what I said, and I'll tell you what they said I said in a moment. But produce it. Produce the audio, produce the video, produce the writing where I said, and their accusation against me is that I said that Sandy Hook, Newtown never happened and that nobody ever died.
Right.
They said that I said the same thing about the Boston bombing. I've never said any of those things, ever. Right. Now, have I examined, weird things about both of those? Yes. Have I had guests on who have examined it with me? Yes. Have I had guests on who do think that they never happened? Yes. And we heard their side of it. But that's what we do. But does that make me a hoaxer? Only if I say, people, this is Carl Gallups, and I do not believe that anybody died at Sandy Hook. It's a hoax. I've never, ever said those words. And you know why I've never said those words, Mike? Because I don't believe it. That's not my position on it. So let me just remind our audience of the context of all of that. It all goes back. See, this is why the liberal media is irrelevant. They're just becoming more and more irrelevant, because if they can't get something on you, they just make it up, and they are very creative about how they make it up, Mike. But here's what happened, and this is why I don't. When I look at liberal media, my first inclination is to not trust the headlines or the content of the article. That's my first inclination. Why? Right. Here's why. Here's the background on it. So Donald Trump asked me to do the prayer at the opening of the rally, or his people did. Donald Trump himself didn't call me, but his people did, and asked me to do the opening prayer, the opening rally at Pensacola, Florida. Okay? And it was huge. I mean, there were like 15,000 people in the arena, awesome. 5,000 people outside. It was picked up by national media. I was all over national media for the week after that, people interviewing me. How did you get picked to open a Donald Trump rally, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm doing that. Well, in the meantime, a few months later, they thought Donald Trump, was just he was going to be a flash in the pan. But a few months later, here he is. He's huge. And the Florida primary's coming up. And now I'm out there as somebody who endorsed Trump. And I'm a pastor, and of course Trump was trying to court the evangelical, vote, and the media was going crazy over it, so they started going on his website, and they found that I had done this prayer, and I was endorsing him. So they did some background on me, and they found out I was a best-selling author, I'm all over TV, I'm all over radio, I'm a 30-year pastor, I'm a former cop, and all of these different things connected to Joe Arpaio, and they freaked. So they started going through archives of my radio shows. They had to somehow paint me as some kind of a nut. And so the next thing you know, 3 or 4 huge liberal media outlets, one of them funded by George Soros, another one in Great Britain, another one up in New York, and I'm not even going to say their names because I don't want to give them free advertising, because we've got people all over the world that listen to us, so I'm not going to do that. But the bottom line is, they made up headlines that says, the preacher that endorses Trump is a hoaxer, a Sandy Hook hoaxer. He doesn't believe anybody died at Sandy Hook. That's outrageous. I've never said that. I've never said that. No, what I have done, though, is I have questioned the government narrative. And I have questioned the mainstream media narrative of all of the details of Sandy Hook. Do I think children died? Yes, I do. Now, I know there are millions of Americans that don't think anybody died. But I'm not one of those. I've been on record from the beginning. I think people died. I think children died. I think there was a tragic, horrific, murderous, godless day that day. And there are broken-hearted people. I get it. That's what I think. But I don't believe the entire liberal media. Why, in this world we live in, Mike, why would anybody believe?
Why should you?
Why should we? I mean, there's so many things that people have questioned that turn out later they were exactly right. You just named a few of them a few moments ago.
Sure.
So the bottom line is, and I'm running out of time, Mike, we can talk about this later, but again, 30 years pastor in one church, you won't get a single soul to tell you they've ever heard me say that I didn't think that the Boston bombing never happened or that Sandy Hook never happened. You know why you can't get them to say it? Because I've never said it.
You've never said it.
I've worked 14 years at this radio station. You won't get a person down here to say, yeah, Carl talks about that all the time. On the other hand, I do talk about the Obama fraud case all the time. Why? Because I believe, and quote, I think I know that there's a fraud committed there. So I talk about it all the time because I'm passionate about it. So the bottom line is these liberal rags just made it up. They didn't interview me. They put false headlines and a false story, and then they embedded sound bites and video segments, and they said, see, here it is. Well, if you would go look at those, you never hear me say those words. I mean, it's just unbelievable, Mike, how they craft it together. So let me go on record. I believe people died. Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, I believe children died. But I do not believe every detail of the government or the leftist media narrative. Why should we? Shouldn't we ask tough questions? Yes. That's why it's called Freedom Friday, and that's why you listen to Freedom Friday. Thank you.